Hello, and welcome to another panel discussion hosted by Grow Opportunity in collaboration with the Cannabis Council of Canada. My name is Marilyn de Guzman, and I will be your moderator. Thank you for joining us. I understand we have a great array of people joining us today from Canada and overseas as well, so welcome everyone. Today's session, Quantifying Quality, Getting Cannabis Quality Down to a Science, is sponsored by Purity IQ, Trust the Difference Science Delivers, and by AirMed, Cultivate Success with AirMed Seed to Sale Business Solutions. I'm excited to introduce our excellent set of panelists in today's discussion, but before I do that, just some housekeeping reminders. You, the audience, will be in listen-only mode. You will, however, be able to post your questions at any time during our discussions to any or all of our panelists on the question box in your webinar user panel. You may post your question at any time, and I will do my best to get to as many questions as possible. Today's webinar will be recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to access the recording. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Stephen Newmaster. He's the director of the NHP Research Alliance and a botany and genomics professor at the University of Guelph. He conducts research on plant genomics, metabolomics, medicinal plants, and molecular diagnostic identification systems with more than 150 publications and $30 million in R&D funding. His research has resulted in development of the Canadian Cannabis Registry, which is assembling genetic and chemical fingerprints that characterize cannabis cultivars, define chemical traits, and enable marker-assisted breeding programs for consistent product brands. Welcome, Stephen. We also have Scott Savoy. Scott is the CEO and master grower at Crystal Cure in New Brunswick. Scott is an experienced leader specializing in high-value horticulture. With over 15 years working commercially with apples, grapes, and cannabis, he has overseen countless large-scale projects and teams. Most recently with Robinson's Cannabis, he became known in Nova Scotia's Annapolis Valley as a soil and horticulture expert from his time at award-winning and renowned winery Benjamin Bridge. Scott is originally from Miramichi, New Brunswick. Paul Valder is the co-founder and chief technical officer at Purity IQ. Paul coaches senior management and organizations that are committed to driving access to markets through combining validated quality assurance programs with best-in-class scientific technologies and supported with recognized third-party operational processes and business management systems. His focus is on medical cannabis, probiotics, plant-based proteins, spices, coffee, olive oils, fish and seafood, honey, vanilla, and all high-throughput traded food commodities. And last but not least is Ken Weisbrod. He's the former lead executive for the cannabis business and strategy development at Loblaw Shoppers Drug Mart. He's a visionary and is results-oriented retail executive with expertise in the cannabis industry and broad-based experience in retail and healthcare operations, technical innovation, analytical methods, quality and process management, and supply chain expertise for controlled substances. Welcome, everyone. So I'd like to kick off this discussion, I guess, just go around the table to just sort of give an overview. If you could give an overview about yourself, your background, and what you're currently working on today. So let's start with Scott, then Ken, Steve, and then Paul. Scott?
Hi. I got into agriculture with a degree in plant science from Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. Pretty much since I got into the workforce, I worked towards high-value horticulture regionally here in New Brunswick, bringing apple varieties like Honeycrisp into the mainstream of production and higher density plantings. After that, I spent quite a bit of time in the winemaking world, both in Niagara and in Nova Scotia, playing a role in developing new vineyards, cultivating new cultivars, and with new techniques. And as the emergence of the cannabis industry came about, I took a leap into the cannabis world. So here we are.
Nice. Ken?
Hi, everybody. I have been involved in the industry for about 7 years, executive at Loblaw Shoppers Drug Mart. We're the largest pharmacy chain in Canada. I've am a pharmacist by profession. I've practiced in Canada and in the United States. We are the largest company, I think without argument, in the world that has embraced cannabis. When Canada's gone through that legalization journey, we felt it compelling at shoppers that we entered. We had many of our patients asking about medical cannabis throughout the last few years, and we felt it compelling that we get involved in it. We have many patients that have embraced the drug for neuropathic pain, insomnia, anxiety. So we've gone through many rigorous development processes and training our pharmacists. Cannabis and medical cannabis in Canada can only be bought online. It is not in our stores at the moment. We're hoping for some changes in legislation. So excited to talk about today in terms of standardizations and really what's important from a pharmacy and the healthcare profession when it comes to medical cannabis.
Paul?
Yes, hello everybody, and thanks for the intro, Mary Lynn. I've spent, I guess, the last 20 years in supply chain compliance, mostly in the area of ISO-based voluntary standards. Before, during, and forming Purity IQ, we operated in the allergen space in supply chain compliance. We're hoping that my current project with Purity IQ is based on the learnings from some work we've done with Ken's group and other learnings, of course, with the NHP Research Alliance, which Stephen will talk a little bit more about, and bringing some sort of GMP, good agricultural practices, together with the science and the analytical side of the industry into what we're calling the Cannabis Authenticity and Purity Standard, which officially is actually launching this week. So very exciting, and learning more about what everybody's needs are today and hearing from everybody.
Stephen? Oh, your audio is...
Okay, good. It's good to be here, everyone. Genomics and metabolomics professor for 20 years at the University of Guelph, and I'm director of the NHP Research Alliance, which assembles libraries, reference material libraries from voucher specimens, which go into an herbarium, to make genomic sequence libraries and metabolomic fingerprints that we use to build diagnostic tests to authenticate ingredients. But really what drives my research program is to understand how plants heal and how plants give nutrition. And we do that by not only understanding heredity and genetics, but also the metabolites that are bioactive. And for cannabis, it's a very fascinating plant. There are so many, and we've been building an extensive library of cannabis cultivar metabolomic fingerprints, and it's the largest in the world. And we're doing this in collaboration with scientists at Bruker Biospin in Germany, who are working very close with us. So I look forward to the discussions today.
Right. Okay, so now let's start. I guess I can start with you, Stephen, since you were the last to speak. I have to set the stage for our discussion, which is on cannabis quality, sort of breaking down the science for cannabis quality. We have, we can't talk about that without talking about genetics and the really the beginnings of a good cannabis. Can you talk about the current state of cannabis genetics in Canada? The availability, the challenges that the industry is facing now in getting this, like really the good cultivars and the availability and access to them. So let's start with you, Stephen, and then maybe we can get everybody's inputs on that.
Sure. I'm going to start a little bit with some background in genomics. Over the last decade, we've moved genomic tools to sequence more of the genome. So we're really focused now on whole genome sequencing tools. And the genome of cannabis sativa has been sequenced. More populations would be better, but we have a pretty good idea what that genome looks like. The tools that are available for the industry now are based on whole genome sequencing. So these include SNP chips, many different markers that help us to understand the heredity of your cultivars. And this is very important for selective breeding. Certain cultivars that have a certain heredity associated with them produce different chemistry. And that chemistry we measure as metabolites is what the consumers experience. So it's really important to understand the variety in the genome because it really drives the biochemistry. One of the challenges that we face right now is making sure we understand how much variability is there in Canada in the marketplace. And that's one of the points of the registry and the CAP standard that Paul Valder will be talking about. If we have it all in one place, we'll understand who owns what and how much variability is there, and how we can really provide a high quality product for consumers that's consistent all the time.
And Scott, can you talk about this from the cultivators, from the LP's perspective? Like, what are you looking for? What challenges are you facing in just finding the right cultivar and the availability and access for those types of things that you want to produce?
Really, it's a fascinating proposition because we know through, for example, reproduction of a particular clonal selection that giving different light spectrums can enhance or negate certain metabolites. And so if we knew upfront what the genetic potential is, then we would, as growers, potentially be able to work towards a more consistent product.
Right. And Paul, from your perspective, I know your company offers the certification for cannabis products, and what's the value proposition for licensed producers, and how is this different than the testing and analysis that's already required under the regulations?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I think I'd like to preface it by saying we're all in a growing stage, no pun intended, but you know, this is in its infancy. What we've observed in the last few years is that there doesn't appear to be standardization that really considers both you know, the right from the grow stage right through to the retail piece. It also doesn't really look at the standards that are out there, don't really look at combining best practices for good manufacturing or good growing, good agricultural practices with the science and the testing that's needed beyond the regulatory piece. And then usually the regulatory piece is dealing primarily with safety issues. What we're trying to bring to the table with our standards is the quality piece, the consistency piece that, you know, Ken drives home all the time, and that, you know, that everybody is looking for. So we've set it up in such a way that the standard, when it comes to market, it allows a stepped approach to this, because there's still a lot of learnings, particularly on the science side of things, to bring this to its fruition, you know, in over time. So we're looking at you know, allowing manufacturers, growers, and so on to get involved at a basic stage, with a basic certification that looks at their systems and their safety and so on, and the quality, and then move to a more advanced stage when they're comfortable with their cultivars and final products and so forth. So, and that would be the authenticity piece that we're offering, which is very unique in the marketplace today.
And Ken, you're nodding your head. Yeah, I know you've mentioned this in your intro. Can you talk a bit more about that from the medical cannabis perspective, I guess, where you come from?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you know, when we entered into business, you know, as I'm a pharmacist by background, and we're trained the same way doctors are, and you know, I couldn't turn, this is a new drug, it's coming into our ecosystem, our patients are consuming it for wellness. I couldn't turn to a monograph to look at what this drug is, right? And back in those days, they called it marijuana. People were consuming it and replacing their traditional, what we call ethical drugs with cannabis. And we spent a lot of rigor in the industry going out and understanding people like Scott and what they do for a living, understanding their capabilities to grow. You know, their selling proposition would be, we've got unique genetics. They always took me to their mother plants. We've got the best genetics. We've got the best products out there. We have unique growing capability, and their environments were distinctly different. We're going to render the best products out there and the best chemistry. And it became very clear to me back in those days that we're going to have to put a lot of rigor in assessing who our vendors are, and we did that. And one of the stipulations that we put in our contracts was, we're going to invest in you. We're going to do a quality analysis of how you go through your process to a greater degree than Health Canada even put on our new industry. And we asked them specifically, if you're growing, we want the products to come from your LP to us. Because it became very clear in the industry there was a lot of substitution going on. You know, there were LPs that specifically were just selling wholesale into the market. That cannabis would end up in bottles with a consistent label on the outside, but very inconsistent product going into the bottle. And that, from a medicine perspective, is unacceptable. So, you know, when you think about what Stephen just said and what Paul's talking about in terms of standard and rendering those consistent genetics and chemistry, that's the medicine, that final product. It needs to be consistent. It needs to have provenance on it, and it needs to be consistent. So the best bet that we had going into this industry was ensuring that it came from the same grower, good, you know, a good grower like someone like Scott. They're invested into their industry, and it's their IP, and that was very important for us.
Right. And I want to, since Ken mentioned you, Scott, so you both come from, you know, as a master grower and the CEO of the company as well. So you have the business, you have two hats basically. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what your thoughts are about this, you know, this development of this standards from an LP perspective, you know, both from a cultivator and a business side of things.
The standards themselves, sorry, you mean as far as the craft cannabis standards, or you mean the standards of developing the record of the genomics and
Yes, so the one that we're talking about, where, you know, having the standards. Yes. So yeah.
I think it's excellent because really we're trying to minimize the variability within our own products. That's currently, you know, we are very small, and our objective right now is whole flower specifically. And through all our growing techniques, we're trying to end up with a package that each consumer that receives the package gets a very similar experience. And that does begin with the genetics and follows through absolutely every step of the process until it is in the package. And so what I bring, I guess, to the team here and to our farmer series is that I take it from the package first. I want to see that every experience that's had out there by consumers is replicatable. Now, what that does mean is byproduct. You know, it means declassification of certain grades of flower as going forward. And that's only like for every single strain, for every phenotype clone that we will produce. That has to be the primary objective.
Right. Okay, so we're getting some questions here from the audience. I want to get to that now. So there's one question for Stephen. Regarding genetics, do you foresee a universal standard like USP, BP, etc., for assessing cannabis metabolite and hence strains?
Oh, definitely. These will be AOAC standards. They may be brought in. Pharmacopoeia is working on these as well. We're actively working with AOAC, publishing in AOAC, developing the standards, sitting on committees. It's an incredible amount of work to do all these experiments to validate the methods, and it takes a long time. We have to remember that the cannabis industry is new, or what's new to the cannabis industry and what's new for the cannabis industry is quality assurance standards. We have it in the food industry. It's been here a long, long time. It's being pushed into the natural products industry. And for the cannabis industry, they just didn't speak this language of having validated methods and standards, GMP. This is all new to them. And the tests that we need to ensure consistency, and that's one of the things that Ken came to me 2 years ago probably now, is what would that test look like? And the answer that we ended up coming back with is it's partly genetic, because you want to know where it came from a heredity perspective, but most importantly, you, and Scott brought this up, you want to know how that plant product's going to interact with the consumer, with us people, and that's based on bioactive compounds. And if you ask the question, okay, let's look at THC or CBD or terpene A, B, or C, you're very biased because there are hundreds of different phytochemicals. So which one do you pick? And if you go into science to try and to answer that question, we don't know enough. So our approach was, let's do an untargeted test, capture as many metabolites in a fingerprint, and that's what we do with NMR technology, to be able to have a measure of the bioactivity from product that the consumer experience. And that becomes a new standard for the industry. And it has to go through all the processes of validation. And the place to do that, to answer that question, are organizations like AOAC.
Right. And I guess along that line, we have another question. This is addressed to the panel on the concept of certification, like organically grown cannabis, as it pertains to the derivation certifications being discussed. How does the panel view the concept of a certification? Paul, yeah.
Sure. Absolutely, organic is part of the need for certification. And the way that certification has traditionally gone in other sectors, Stephen mentioned food or pharma, the ability to be able to combine certifications for operational and financial efficiencies is a real opportunity for our industry, the cannabis industry as well. And therefore, you know, being able to not only make a authenticity claim or a GMP claim or an organic claim, these all need to be considered as you go down a certification process. And so, you know, it's going to happen. What we've seen in the industry is that you know, as I said in the beginning, there are many different types of GMP programs around the world that are usually found, and the ones that are being used now are mostly founded on the pharma side of the industry. But nobody's really looking at the cannabis or the hemp industry as a standalone that has individual needs, special needs outside of those other sectors. So what we've tried to do with the program that we're talking about, the CAPS program, is look at the specific needs of the industry and the various pieces in the supply chain as well. So right from seed through to the sale piece, and how do you modularly address those individual needs as well, to provide those assurances and that chain of custody assurance that somebody like Ken is going to need at the end. So, you know, organic is just another component of that, and that needs to be verified against a third-party approach.
Yeah, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, Ken, from a retailer perspective, and you know, someone who buys these products for the retail shelves. Like, what are your thoughts on certification? And what, you know, is that something you're looking for when you're dealing with the producers?
Yeah, I mean, we took the position, and you know, we are a licensed producer in Canada, a very unique one, and we took a leadership role in trying to formulate some sort of standards. You know, when I reached out to Stephen back in the day, it was really about, you know, help me figure out a test that would give us a confidence level and some, you know, formulation of standardization. And we have taken it to a great level. We have a project at University Health Network, which in Canada is a premier research institute with the major teaching hospitals in Toronto. And we have a project with 2,000 patients in it and protocols written through University Health Network, looking at cannabis products that have a higher standard. We have their full certificates of analysis. We present that to physicians, the chemistry of these products. So when they're prescribing products for their patients, they can really have a robust, if you like, monograph of what that product looks like. And the great thing, some of those licensed producers went to the extent to do metabolite profiling and utilizing the technology that Stephen had developed, which is amazing because that also provides those physicians who are prescribing it a confidence level that if they can hit those metabolite profiles consistently, they're building a consistent product. And if you're looking at what we call real world evidence outcome studies, and I can tell you that the FDA in the United States in early January came out in terms of licensing products in the United States, even under the Farm Bill, they want real world evidence. And the FDA in the United States wrote the textbook on real world evidence. And it's amazing because a lot of people are consuming cannabis for wellness. What exactly are they consuming? We're doing a study and we're looking at outcomes, but you can't track consistent outcomes unless those inputs are consistent, unless you've got a guarantee that you're actually putting them on the same product. You know, many patients will come to us anecdotally and tell us, you know, it really started out well for me on my neuropathic pain and it doesn't seem to last. And the reality is it's probably not the same product that they started with. And unless, you know, and unless that is consistent input, how can we say that the therapy is really helping them? So that's really, so it's the foundation. And again, it's the tests. We don't have consistent tests. In Canada, LPs can pick their labs, but there's really, you know, outside of THC and CBD percentages mandated through Health Canada, the rest of the profile is up for grabs. And we see certificates of analysis on the products that we bring in for our patients very inconsistent. So that's something that needs to happen in the industry too. Testing is really a foundation. So.
Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, I will say that, you know, that's exactly what the advanced portion of CAPS is designed to do, using the genomic, establishing the genomic iris or profile, and then also adding on the NMR piece to that, which is going to give you your fingerprint that Stephen talked to, and then the ability to do the batch to batch testing to compare that against the library or against the reference registration. So, you know, that's built in to the certification in the advanced version. Having said that, we do have now a benchmark of confidence intervals that we've established, or a quality rating, if you will, as a starting point. Will that evolve and grow? As I said earlier, definitely, we're in the infancy of that. But that's where the research that we continue to do and invest in through Stephen's group at the university will help us to refine that as we go. And things like AOAC and our involvement with ASTM in the United States, working on standardization and testing, will help us mature that for the industry. And eventually there will be, as Stephen said, absolutely standardized testing.
All right. Another question here from a drug development standpoint, is there value in using pure landraces versus cross genetics? Stephen, maybe you want to take this one?
There we go. Sorry. That's an interesting question. I'm going to go back to the point I made about variability. And we can reduce variability through breeding, and we can start to actually breed for specific biochemical pathways. And then we can start to refine these chemicals down so that we have specific molecules that are going into products. It could be a few molecules, or they could be down to single molecules, which is now pharmacy and their drugs. And there's this whole continuum of variability in the plant, but we don't understand how all this chemistry works together in our body. So we can't really answer the question that's been posed. We have to go back. And one of the things I really love about the real world study is, and we've been doing this, part of my programs in ethnobotany, we've been doing this in cultures for thousands of years. We experiment, but the experiments we have now are based on science. So the work at University Health Network led by Hans Clark, when they sat down and designed that, and we talked about that, one of the things that was really important are input-output mechanistic models. The input to the system, which is humans, is cannabis, and we need to understand what it is. Ken's already brought that up. So we need to understand genetics, great, but more importantly, we need to understand the bioactive molecules. So we make these fingerprints, these metabolite fingerprints. The output model is we can look at now the response of the human, that particular person, through blood and urine markers, but also blood and urine metabolomics. How did they process that? And then their health response. And that helps us to narrow down individual response to specific cultivars, specific genetics. And we need that kind of data to start answering the question that's been posed, because we just don't have it yet.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
on
go
the
ahead.
production side, I think the importance of maintaining landrace genetics, you know, a lot of landraces evolved over, you know, thousands, at least 13,000 years. And so they've developed particularities. And the reality is a lot of the genetics that are in the current LP market, Canada, US, or otherwise, have been truncated over the last 30 years. And so it's definitely, if you're going to take genomics and metabolites, the landrace varieties have a tremendous value. What it is, like you say, specifically today, unknown. But to give you an example, in the apple industry, 90% of apples have 1% of the genetic diversity, right? So when we see a new apple variety that's outside that genetic range, its genetics are completely different. It can allow us to tap into a myriad of other things or textures or components. So cannabis would definitely fit same bill. So what role landrace will play, not sure. Is it important to keep? Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I
And you
definitely
mentioned,
agree
yeah, go ahead,
with
Stephen.
Scott. And one of the projects that a number of geneticists, our labs involved this, is a pan-genomic survey of cannabis sativa. And it's interesting, you follow the history, and you know, through the 40s, 50s, 60s, plants were brought over from the center of what we think diversity was for cannabis sativa. And this is in, you know, in parts of Asia. So this is really on the borders of India, Pakistan, and into Tibet and China. So we've been collecting. We were actually in Dharamshala a couple of years ago and collecting these populations, wild population types, and some of them were harvested and grown by locals, that are completely different than anything we've ever seen that's being grown in cultivation by licensed producers in North America. So a small group, a small population size was brought over, as you mentioned, Scott, and it was developed into our industry. And what's left behind is a huge amount of diversity. What that diversity means, I don't know. And I kind of go back to that last input-output model. If we have that model developed and we're understanding response from the patient, and we start putting in these land races and go, oh, we had no idea, like we're missing some huge groups of flavonoids that are produced at, you know, high elevation, 12,000 feet or 10,000 feet or something in the Himalayas. Those will be really interesting. But we need the models to understand the variability. But you're right, those land races are incredibly important.
Right. Another question here. How is the heterogeneity of the batch and the plant itself overcome in terms of cannabinoid content? Steve?
I'll start, and then Scott's going to be thinking and jump in. Scott made a really good point earlier about the environment can hugely impact chemistry, and light is a really good example. So one of the things that we're doing at the University of Guelph, we had this great donation from Cassie, you know, Cadence Agricultural Systems, and we have these growth chambers, and they're very sophisticated. We can model the parameters that impact growth in any plants. We do this with a number of medicinal plants. We're doing it with cannabis. This is fertigation, so these are the nutrients, light, temperature, humidity, all modeled on a computer very precisely. And we're looking at response of the plant through sensors that monitor different changes in light in the plant. So when we do that, we see the plants produce a lot of different chemistry depending on how we manipulate. Now that is controlled partly by genetics, so it's not like you can take any cultivar and make it do anything. There are certain lines that will produce more flavonoids, for example, canoflavin A and B, and we can manipulate light and temperature to be able to produce the highest quality flavonoids and the highest production in a really short time in these chambers. So that's the kind of work we're doing from a research basis. But I don't know, Scott, do you want to jump in and talk about production? And
well, what I would say is that also during the time frame, we can't view metabolites as simple accumulation, right? So, for example, a particular strain harvested at 40 days of flower initiation can have some significant metabolites that could be highly medicinal and in a higher concentration than the same plant having been brought to, say, 63 days of flowering. And so, you know, it's unfortunate that the LP world is still guessing. You know, I always say, okay, we see a marker of genetic potential, whether it's yields or terpenes or THC, and then we assess our methodologies to turn around and say, well, yeah, this can yield more, and we can produce more, you know, of a particular metabolite by, you know, enhancing light or, you know, other factors. So it's definitely part of the puzzle. However, we see, you know, we have test grow one specific clone, one cutting, propagated out 2 different facilities using the same light spectrum and have a noticeably different percent of a particular metabolite. We've seen it, we live it. And so now we're trying to see how we can better ourselves and create more uniformity, producing in different environments and facilities.
Right. Question for Ken. Are you foreseeing a day when Loblaws or Shoppers Drug Mart will require third-party certification from their cannabis hemp suppliers?
My hope would be that the federal government will mandate certifications in the industry. I mean, the reality is, you know, and I'm just listening to Stephen and Scott, is, you know, when you think about the plants and their chemistries and you know, the industry is moving very quickly. We've got pharma companies very interested in the space, and their mentality is very similar to mine as a pharmacist: receptor, molecule. We've got companies developing synthetic forms of THC and CBD again. We've got biosynthesis of CBD, which is becoming very popular. And when I look at it, it's really about, you know, you hear concepts of entourage effect, and, you know, is it more important to have a full plant extract or a full flower, and those things. And the reality from my perspective is maybe so. Lots of literature around all of those things. The reality is I need, if you're talking about a full plant and why people consume cannabis and compare it to single molecules, we've seen limitations of synthetic THC. Synthetic THC has been on the market since the mid-'80s. I've been dispensing it as a young pharmacist with lots of limitations. So there is all of those things that are really important in terms of a full plant extract and entourage, which has been very documented in literature. We need robust data to compare them. So back to certification, absolutely, because that is the industry. And people consume this drug. The wellness market is the large component of this market. They want natural source. They don't want their cannabis formed in a test tube. We hear that all the time. So it's really important to get some certifications. I can tell you the tobacco industry today has a lot more rules around it in terms of standardization than the medical cannabis industry. And I understand that that takes time to formulate. And in fairness to Health Canada, they've got rules that are in C45 about tracking and tracing, which would come into play in terms of standards around how the chemistry should be rendered to the public, to the doctors, to the consumer. So all those things are in play, a new industry, and it needs to evolve. And you can see the US is looking very carefully on what Canada's done, good and bad. So the answer is yes, absolutely. Certification, best way would be the industry to come together and formulate what those standards would look like. That's the way lots of industry, it's the way the pharma industry behaves, right? Is let the industry come together on standardization, and that would be great as opposed to a government mandating it. They need to work together for sure.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be a follow-up question to that. Like, what needs to happen? So, yeah, it's true. Industry needs to come together. Is there what do you think would be the driving force or that catalyst where the industry would finally come together, would make the industry come together to actually actively pursue this road to certification? Paul.
Yeah, I think everybody should be aware that the Standards Council of Canada has an initiative to do just this and has been working with ISO and the United Laboratories and ourselves to come to consensus with industry about, some voluntary standards. In addition to that, we have groups in the United States like the ASTM group and AOAC that are looking at scientific standards. So there are a number of groups, including the group that over 30 stakeholders that we put together, including Shoppers Drug Mart, when we built the CAP standard. So as a starting point, so there is a lot of consensus already from stakeholders throughout the supply chain in this space that have provided documents, comments, papers, and so forth. So these have all been considered or are being considered, to Ken's point, and that is the absolute way that we've always done this in Canada. We've driven consensus-based voluntary standards from the beginning, and we continue to support that. And I think I think these will all they will converge, and we will have multiple standards out there for based on and competing standards eventually. But we did it in the food world as well with the Global Food Safety Initiative. There's 5 or 6 standards that supply chain can choose from. They're all benchmarked equivalent and so forth. So we're quite a ways away from that yet, but we're working towards that for sure.
I'll just add a quick point. I think everyone should recognize that cannabis is a schedule of part of the 1961 Narcotic Convention. It's restricted narcotic, and it's great to see the United Nations moving on, rescheduling it from Schedule 4. These are really important distinctions. You'll see a lot of international labs not getting involved. I think that the United States moving slowly on federal legalization as the custodians of those narcotic conventions has a lot of influence. But once those things do change for cannabis, specifically internationally, you will see standards moving into the industry. Right now, you've got to be out there and cutting edge. And in Canada, in the legalization journey, companies have moved forward in doing it, but there are companies in the United States that won't venture into cannabis because of its restricted nature. You'll see that in Europe. So it's moving, but it's moving relatively slow. But there's been some great movement in the last couple of months with the World Health Organization recognizing CBD specifically and deregulating it. So we're moving in the right direction to formulate all of these great standards that will come to the industry for sure.
Right. I have Scott?
I would say what will drive the industry towards this standardization will, without a doubt, be the monetary aspect, right? I think that, right now it's really unfortunate that a lot of the bodies are looking for example, we're becoming restricted to a minimum of 20% THC, and that is pretty much the only standard that's out there. That leaves an awful lot on the playing field. However, if we can standardize our or genomics and metabolites, then we can say, yes, this particular strain grown this way with this LP has this value. So associating the value is how that's going to make the industry want, because right now there's a lot of product that's not 20% THC that has value. Nobody knows how to quantify it. That's how you get LPs and micros on.
And that's an interesting point with all the, the bottom line is really the bottom line, right? What I'm wondering, what you think is the role of consumer education? What role does consumer education play in this whole dynamics of setting standards and certifications? Yeah, getting them educated on what goes behind the plant, and that it's not just the THC or the CBD and stuff like that. Any thoughts on that, Scott? I guess.
Absolutely, a huge education point, and I'm a huge proponent of asking consumers of our products to tell me specifically the typicity of the feel, right? For now, lack of better terms, feel. So whether you have an ailment or not, if it's just for pure recreational use, I'm really curious as to the typicity, because I do feel as though THC as strict numbers misnomer. I 100% believe that lower THC varieties can have greater medicinal value. And so I think the education of the consumer towards the impact of biometabolites to the typicity of the buzz or the feel or that medical value is critically important for specifically the medical side of cannabis, but also towards the recreational side, because I think there's a gray zone between folks that are consuming regularly recreationally, but in fact, they're achieving some objectives that allows them to have a better life, better lifestyle, better life.
Ken,
yeah, again, as a pharmacist, it's data, right? It's about understanding the drug, and it's again consistent inputs. Scott brings up a good point on as the vice of cannabis. I mean, you'll see in the provincial wholesalers, they're moving flower at high THC. For a cohort that wants to consume and smoke cannabis to get high, that's the recreational market, and it's very defined. And the movement and tonnage of cannabis that moves through that space is high flower THC. To juxtaposition that on pure medical place, we're talking about oils, balanced. I can tell you anecdotally, high CBD oils that have microdosing THC above 0.3% for sure, because pure CBD seems to have some limitations, but again, it's evidence-based. And the best way to get that is consistent inputs. So it's coming full circle, and one of the things we did in the project, in engaging Stephen's team to get those tests and those markers of consistency, the data that we're capturing, we utilized a company called TrueTrace to help us grab that data out of the United States, which is really critical about what are these forms of the drug that are really beneficial from a medical wellness perspective. And again, it comes into play with full entourage. We encourage synthetic forms to be marked against those natural products that are grown consistently. And again, data is really important. So from a consumer perspective, we want to consume the drug for wellness to replace traditional therapies. The evidence is really important. The consistency of the product is the foundation of that.
Right. And there's a question here for Stephen. Have these technologies, genomics and NMR, have been proven in authentication certification for other industries?
Oh, definitely. So we use genomics all the time to make sure that there's no E. coli in our food. And so in the foodborne pathogen industry, it's huge. Metabolomics is huge in the quality and control in drugs. So NMR is used consistently, and a really good example is fentanyl, where there's different forms. And if you use a typical analytical chemistry like mass spec, they all have the same weight, but one of them is 10 times more potent because it has a different isomer. How do you see that? NMR, that's how you see it. It has So there are a number of tools. We use NMR in the coffee industry for coffee quality. We use it for honey adulteration, milk. You can actually figure out where milk came from, how it was filtered. It's used in many different industries. So it became a tool which we call fit for purpose. If you're looking at consistency, it's a fit for purpose tool. I want to go back to the previous question about, is there a role for education? Definitely, we need to educate consumers about a lot of different aspects of cannabis, but from my perspective, the variability in genetics and chemistry and how that impacts them. But I'm really interested in having consumers interact back with us in science and industry, giving us their feedback. If you think about the medicinal plant industry, how do you make a claim on a bottle that ginkgo biloba is good for your memory? Well, you can make that claim if there are clinical trials to actually support brain health clinical trials. And it's very controlled, and you have so many patients. The University Health Network's a good example. You can have tissue culture studies to say, how does this impact? It gives you more energy. This is a turmeric study. So they look at mitochondrial function on tissue in vitro studies. That's another way. It's very controlled. You can go to the other end of that spectrum of control, where you have less control but lots of data, and you ask questions to consumers. Hey, you bought this product. It's going through a system like Ken described, where we know the inputs because we've done the chemistry, we've done genomics, we have these metabolomic profiles. What did you experience? And when you get, especially in social media world, tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of responses back about a bunch of different cultivars that you know a lot about, that's fun data to play with. And I'm a multivariate statistician. I love getting my hands on that kind of data because it forms hypotheses to understand about different strains, how they're helping us as medicinal plants, helping us get through life. Because people have all these claims, but they're not backed by science. But this is one way to do it. So there's a huge role for the consumer. And it's not just with cannabis, it's with all nutrition.
And that's, you know, what Stephen just said, it's the next step for the industry is, you know, Canada is in the midst of the advisory committee looking at natural health products, cannabis natural health products, where they're nutraceuticals, a little less of a standard than pharmaceuticals, but again, claims associated with these products, if you want claims, it helps me with inflammation, it helps me with insomnia. There needs to be rigor on clinical studies to support those claims. And the companies that will stand out to produce consistent product to get those claims in studies will be the ones that will resonate for the wellness market. And again, it all is the foundation, starts with consistent inputs. The way you grow, the way you process the product, the way you test the product is really critical in order to associate claims with those products, as opposed to anecdotal, because someone down the road told me cannabis helps me. That's a big distinction, and that's the educating the consumers. And you'll see the proliferation in the United States on CBD products and topical for inflammation with no rigorous studies to support any of those claims.
Right.
We should make one thing clear before we're all finished up too, and this will be really fast. We talked a lot about variability and consistency, and there's going to be somebody in the audience that's thinking, sounds like it's wildly variable and you can't have consistency. And I just want to be able to say there are licensed producers with very good manufacturing and good agricultural practices that make a 95% confidence interval in the metabolomic profiles. They get a bang on batch to batch to batch. And there's others that are way below 50. So, and when they mix, we see it. So there's a lot of variability, but the good news is there are licensed producers that make very consistent product. That's important to know.
Absolutely. When we went out to do the real world evidence study, we've got a robust offering and amazing manufacturers, whether they're processors in the industry, like Valens or MediFarm, really capable, or cultivars that, you know, that Organogram and other ones that are growing their own plants and came to offer up their product and stand behind their product. So to Stephen's point, we've got a really robust offering of real world evidence for clinicians like Hans Clark to partake and pick for their patients based on the chemistry, right? They've got a formulary and a monograph, if you like, of these products because we disclose it to them. So to Stephen's point, this industry in Canada is really matured and it's really at a great place. So for that next step to produce those nutraceuticals with claims on it, for sure.
All right. We have an interesting question here about technology. Could I get, sorry, using modern control systems and AI technology, artificial intelligence, to spearhead the standardization of data acquisition and quality control. Are there many organizations right now taking this data-oriented approach to work together in establishing a proper benchmark for all growers? Maybe Paul, you can take this on.
Sure. Yes, and you know, I think you'll see on our website under our partner section that we formed a partnership with a group called the it's called Fixie. It's exactly that. It's a blockchain type of approach to acquiring. They acquire consumer information, experiential information, and try to marry that with the science results that Stephen and we were producing. So the advanced portion or the authenticity portion of our standard is really the science within that blockchain attestation piece. And then through AI, it's exactly what they're going to be doing is they're, you know, using AI to come up with their own sort of experiential or quality rating system for those products. So it's an interesting exercise. I think they're looking to onboard 200,000 consumers shortly. So we'll see where that goes.
Cool. While I have you, Paul, we're getting some questions about the research project that you're embarking on. Maybe you could talk a bit more about that and give us an overview of that research project.
Yeah, just quickly, first of all, I'd like to thank C3 and you know, we've recently become a supporting member to help with C45 and some of the things they're doing. And I'd also like to thank Stephen and his team at the University of Guelph and NHP Research Alliance for helping us launch this important project to gather information so that we can, you know, feed that back to the industry in a standardized fashion. So I'd like to introduce Jenna, maybe Jenna from our team, just to explain it a little bit more than I can.
Hey, Paul, thanks for that. Yeah, I do have a presentation here that I'd like to show for everyone. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. So if I can just get share my screen. All right, can everybody see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so thanks, Paul, again for introducing me. So everyone, my name is Jenna McLeod, and I'm a business relations representative at Purity IQ. I just want to thank everyone first for tuning in and taking the time to listen on this roundtable discussion on quantifying quality. And I feel like that's exactly what the panelists did today. Digging deeper and pushing limits on what we already know is the foundation of science and education. At Purity IQ, that's what we're aiming to do with our Canadian Cannabis and Hemp Research Project. Purity IQ is a global bioscience business founded upon cutting-edge genetic, chemical, and metabolomic biotechnologies. Our mission is to work with brands to bring authenticated products to consumers by developing safety and quality standards founded on innovative science. This scientific research is to analyze and capture the detailed genomic and metabolomic data developed on proprietary insights into the biodiversity of cannabis and hemp cultivars within Canada, which helps to create the identity for your products. With a long successful history defining authenticity and purity and consistency within the wine and honey industries, Brooker Corporation and Purity IQ are proud to provide a limited number of master growers with this unique opportunity to join in our research efforts. This research is being provided free of charge and without any future obligations. Your business and brands have an opportunity to be part of building a diverse DNA and NMR database for this industry. This validated scientific reference library will enable the industry to identify cultivars and verify consistency in formulations of cannabis, hemp, and CBD products. Brooker Corporation, Lighthouse Genomics, High North Laboratory, NHP Research Alliance, and the Cannabis Council of Canada are our partners and that have had a helping hand to bring this project to life. Here are our early adopters advantage. When you submit your catalog of well-documented cultivars to the research laboratory at the University of Guelph, your business will be scientifically advancing the future of the Canadian cannabis and hemp industry. Then we will define both the genomic iris and metabolomic fingerprint using scientific identification, verification, and quantification to establish your uniquely branded and proprietary cultivar. You'll receive a Purity IQ certificate of registration supported with scientific results and analysis for each sample submitted and accepted. The Purity IQ certificate of registration identifies and profiles your proprietary IP and scientific insights in the properties of your most valued genetic resources. You can gain future complementary, secure, and proprietary access to your own genomic iris and Purity IQ metabolomic fingerprint for your products documented with the certificate of registration. You can use your product's DNA and NMR profile to verify authenticity, purity, and consistency for your ongoing production by conducting comparisons against your proprietary data, previously established in the Global Registry for Hemp and Research Reference Library. And that's what we're aiming to do with this project. We want you to start authentic and stay authentic. We need, or our scientists need, 40 cultivar samples from Canadian licensed producers for Health Canada regulatory testing, DNA, and NMR analysis. We want you to learn how to leverage trusted DNA and NMR technologies to claim authenticity, purity, and consistent production as a competitive consumer-facing business advantage, expanding on new markets and supporting brand initiatives. Want to learn more? Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. You can email me directly at jenna.mcleod@purity-iq.com. Thanks for listening.
All right, thanks for that, Jenna. I think you have information, and this webinar is actually being recorded as I mentioned earlier. So if you miss any of the contact information, it'll be in that recording as well. So we've sort of reached the tail end of our discussion today. Before we end though, I want to go around the table and just give everybody a chance to provide some key takeaway about our discussion today. Just provide your insights and key takeaway for our audience. Let's start with Stephen.
Well, my big thing's variance. Let's get these samples in, understand variance, classify it so that we have a system where we can actually monitor quality.
Ken?
Yeah, I think to Stephen's point before, the industry in Canada has really taken a great leadership role. We've got some great, capable companies, and I'm really excited for the future of cannabis and wellness and medical cannabis in the country. And with the US positioning and pivoting potentially next year, I think it's really an exciting time for cannabinoid therapy.
Right, and Scott?
Yeah, it's an exciting time to see that Canada could be, a world leader in really understanding the products we put out there. And so I think that it's an important venture to push forward and grab a hold of what we know as quality. Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks everybody. I just would like to invite everybody to not only that we need to educate consumers, but we need to educate ourselves as well. And so I would like to extend an invitation to everybody to learn more about, how the standards can be, how we can start small, walk before you run, how we can implement some of these programs, and how we can leverage them with customers and consumers.
Right. And with that, we conclude today's panel discussion. It's really been an eye-opening and engaging discussion. Thanks again to our audience and our panelists for joining us and sharing their insights on today's topic. Also, thanks to our sponsors, Purity IQ and AirMed. Join us again on March 19th for another hot topic panel discussion, this time on counterfeit cannabis. Visit growopportunity.ca to register. Have a great day and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.